Yeah, thank you. It's always such an honor to speak at these events because, I mean, like you guys, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I mean, I saw it when I was 15, and that's the only reason why I'm in this business. So thank you so much for coming out. Today, I want to talk mostly about design. So, what it takes to design a film like Star Wars. And these are things that I've learned from working with George. And keep in mind that they're my personal lessons, so please don't take them too literally. So I'll talk my overall process, sort of the general process for designing for Star Wars, and I'll share some new recent art as well. They're kind of my personal things that I've been working on. And then hopefully at the very end we'll have time for questions. Okay, so let's just dive right in. So I've been at ILM for about 13 years, and 7 of those were working directly with George. I mean, I had a very rare opportunity to work one-on-one with him when he was working on the new films. And now 11 years later, I find myself back in the Lucasfilm companies, and I feel like I've come full circle, like I've come home again. So it's a really great treat. As a film production designer and concept artist, nothing excites me more than seeing a blank canvas transformed into a movie design. Star Wars has affected nearly every movie that I've designed, non-Star Wars, of course. I mean, things like Beowulf, Polar Express, Yellow Submarine, and of course, Rogue One. And how it all started for me was back in 1976. I was about 14 or 15 years old, and I saw this painting on the back of the novelization of Star Wars. This, of course, is Ralph McQuarrie's book. And this was before the movie came out. And what was amazing is, in the bookstore, with all these different images, this painting caught my eye. And that started my whole journey from when I was 15 to now, to find out what was it about Ralph's work and about Star Wars and design in general that was so compelling, so timeless, and so Star Wars. And it's something that I'm searching for now, because if I had all the answers, my job would be so much easier. So flash forward 12 years, I end up in the ILM art department, so this is my desk. And the funny thing is, I've been tracking to work my way to ILM, and I originally got hired to do a 3-week project. And that 3 weeks eventually evolved into a 13-year career. Of course there is. A lot of it is Ralph. A lot of it is Joe Johnston. A lot of it is John Barry and Norman Reynolds, the original production designer. But mostly it's Ralph. And what I'm going to show you is a little bit of why I believe that. Ralph is pretty amazing. I mean, his personal style kind of connected really well with George's sensibility in terms of what he wanted to create. And the more I got to know Ralph, the more I got to know George, I really realized that they were pretty much in sync, and it's a pretty special relationship to have. And what I love about Ralph's work is that in his rough thumbnails, he's able to capture so much with so little, and they're so clear. And when you look at his work, it's always stunning because there's so much in there, and they read so well, and it's such a hard thing to do. And so what I did was, when I got to the branch, I looked at all of his work. There was archives and folders of his stuff. And it's really wonderful because the way he sort of combined big and small, simplicity with some complex shapes, were really unique to him. And what I love is that there was a romance to his images that I really liked. When I see his images like this, that is so simple, but it's so Star Wars, and it's an image that I want to see. It's an image in the movie that I want to be in. And so it's that quality that I really try to find. And it's interesting because when you look at Ralph's work, on all of his pages, you will almost find something like that. And that was sort of my key to takeaway, was to really figure out, while I was at the branch, what was it about Ralph's style that was so compelling? And here's a few takeaways. One was that Ralph had this really great way of working out proportions, working out negative and positive shapes to each other, working out the frequency of the designs and elements. You can see here in these early sketches of Jabba's palace compared to Ewok village. It all has the same rhythm in terms of the dark and light values, and it feels very Star Wars. And he even has it in the early sketches of Weston, in terms of the frequency of this. And so it's one of those things that once you start to see Ralph's work, it's something that's very consistent in all of his work. And what Ralph was also really good at was combining old and new, mixing up stuff. So these were thumbnail sketches that he did for another film. But I just love them. And these sketches actually inspired me for the very early development of Jakku. That was where it all started for me, was to do my interpretation of that. And instead of using the regular airplane wrecks, they became Star Destroyers. And all I did was take his idea, exaggerated quite a bit. You know, so this is where it's really fun that now that we're working on these new films, we can go back into the archives and look at Ralph's work for more inspiration for what we should do in the future. And it's really amazing, and I'll show you later in the presentation more examples of this where I just basically use a lot of Ralph as the foundation and then build on it. This is another example. So early on I went in and I had actually very little idea that Ralph and George had developed so much art already for Star Wars that were never seen. Like this is an early sketch of Anthony Base, an early sketch of Tauntaun. And what I did was basically combine those.
What is it?
With my passion for Western art, I did this for him for episode 1. And the funny thing is, you know, as much as Ralph is sort of the gold standard for Star Wars, bottom line is this George. I mean, George was the final art director. Because if you look at this, not all of Ralph's designs were Star Wars. I mean, his hit rate or success rate was probably 95%. Mine, if I was lucky, was like 20%. And what's really fascinating for me was when I went in and saw the files, is that they were all numbered. That's why I numbered all my drawings now. But you can see the progression. And what's really great is you can see George's art direction through the archive. You can see what forms he selected. Like, you know, this was the sequence. He's going for something that's bold, something different. And eventually ends up like this for the cloud car. And by doing that, I was able to sort of dissect George's mind in terms of what was it that attracted him to these unique shapes. Because it's really important. I mean, Ralph's an amazing designer, but it was really George's art direction. Likewise, I mean, like these are fantastic tanks for the ground battle on Hoth by Joe Johnston. But it'd be very different if that version of the battle happened without edits. And so what he did a lot, and so this is one example I pulled from the archives, where George in our reviews would always take a red line pencil or pen, and he would not be afraid to mark up our drawings. And what's great about this, as an example, is that even though George didn't draw a lot, he had such a great sense of proportions, a great sense of details, and a great sense of work. That's a really subtle change, but his outline is a better proportion for the helmet. And those are the things that I geek out about because I love that as well. And to see that from a director is amazing. And this is one of his markups that he did on one of my early drawings of the N1 Starfighter. And it was really fun. I was terrified he was drawing my drawing. But what was great was that you could see his thought process because he just did it on the fly. And you could see his inspiration. And what he had asked the week before was to add a pod to the top. And so here he was actually exploring like, oh, maybe should we have 2 cockpits? Should we add another fin, another gunner down here? And it was really fascinating to see how he wanted to sort of embellish the design to create some more iconic shapes. And ultimately, this was the final design. We ended up getting rid of that thing and just keeping it really simple. Because we had to get R2 in there. There was no way to kind of get him in there. And then we realized also that this design was better because when you frame shots, it was just a cleaner frame. And so this is where George loves to push the boundaries as far as he can and then he'll pull back once the cinema part of it comes in. So what I want to go over very quickly now are sort of the 4 guiding principles that I kind of came up with from my 7 years of working with George. And keep in mind, these are very loose, broad concepts. So don't take them too literally. And also keep in mind, George always said, rules are meant to be broken, so don't take anything too literally. So I think these are kind of the foundations of what we go by now as we proceed into the new films. So the first one is this: I don't want anything to stand out. And this is a quote from him. And when I heard him say that, it didn't make a whole lot of sense because Star Wars is a film where so much is designed. You figure if something's being designed, everything will stand out. But what he meant was this. This is a great quote by him. He said, I want to make everything look natural, a casual, almost, I've seen this before look. It can be a computer, but it's got to be a nondescript computer. I don't want any creatures, any costumes, any spaceships, any sets, anything in the movie to stand out. It should just look like it belongs. And that's a key core philosophy of Star Wars. And if you think about it, when he made Star Wars, the films of that time, or the science fiction films at that time, were heavily art directed. You could kind of see that it was one person who separated everything, who designed everything. It was kind of very specific. And George always said, you know what, real life is not like that. Real life, you go to somebody's house, that's a collection of things from what that person has gathered over a lifetime. And so it's an eclectic mix. And that was the quality that he wanted in the interiors and the sets of Star Wars. He wanted to make it feel real by kind of jumbling it up. And what's wonderful about that is it layers in a sense of reality. Because George always considered these films to be documentaries in some ways. I mean, in his mind, it was as if this universe existed, this set existed on another planet. He just went there and shot his story with his characters and his actors. And it's a great approach to, if you think about it. And the way to do that is obviously research. And that's why at Skywalker Ranch, he has this amazing research department. And I use this quite a bit because at that time, prior to joining him on these films, I tried to invent things out of thin air, and it's a real dangerous trap because you'll fall into creating designs that date very quickly that don't have the foundations of reality. And so research is key. And one example of that is, like for Luke's homestead, what he did was he just found a hotel in Tunisia, and just sundressed it with a couple of little bits. And what you get right away is you automatically get a real place, but it looks fantastic, but it feels real that it's not invented because 80% of it is real. And all you're really doing is just adding on a little bit. And it's really finding that fine line of, okay, well, how much to add and what to add. And the way he always looked at it was, it's like a foreign film for him. The whole universe is there. If you look at any foreign film, nothing's ever explained. But you understand everything because all the homework, all the design connections are already there. And that's what he wanted to do. And that's why, for him, it was so important to lay the foundations for all these films. That's why we had a year of full design doing all this. And even though the audience and the filmmaker, the final experience, you probably see maybe 5 or 10% of that. For me, when I landed on African art as the inspiration for the Federated Droid Army, that really kind of grounded a lot for me, and George really liked that. And you can see this was one of the original inspirations that I had for the battle droid. And as you can see, I love the form and the proportion of that, how elegant and how thin it is. And that's kind of where we formed the head. And even these little things were inspired by the arm because I love the sleekness, but if you remove those, the form is unbalanced and it doesn't have that sort of that visual sort of stability. And I love how this is. And so, you add all those little things in real life to make a design feel more real. And they're very subtle. The other thing I love to do is to mix old and new. And so I love tall ships. And so by using a tall ship as the motif for the bridge of the Federation ship, you automatically bring with this design all of the foundation and the history of your source material. And what it does when you do that is it just makes your design so much more real so that when the audience sees that, they kind of know right away, oh, it must be a bridge, it must be a ship of some kind because there's the steering wheel. And then here's my secret to good robot design. It's hinges and joints. And I geek out of this because I study this a lot. And it's really important because the failure of 2 junctions can totally destroy a design. You can have 2 sticks, but if you have a great junction, a great hinge, a great joint, that will completely sell it. And so I did a lot of research, and when I do the research, it's mainly for me to analyze this and kind of build it into my brain so that I can do my interpretation of it. Here's not a very good one, but the early versions of the droid, I made them practically all hinge. So I thought, oh, hinges should work, so let's make them all hinge. And it's interesting, but it's kind of a little bit too busy. The next principle is visual contrast, and this is a very simple one, and it's very clear in episode 4, because what George wants to do, and a lot of it stems from his filmmaking style where he likes to intercut from one culture to another and make sure that it's very distinctly clear. And so he loves to create distinct palettes. Like for instance, the Empire, the shapes are all geometric shapes, round, squares, triangles. The colors are blacks and grays and with little accents of red. And to contrast that, we have the Rebellion, which are all compound shapes, complex shapes, earth tones, or greens, browns. And by doing that, what he's doing is making it very distinct. And so this is something that we always keep in mind now. And this even impacts in terms of lighting. You'll have different lighting palettes for different sets. You'll have different sound designs for different sets. And they're all, again, very subtle clues to help make this more like a silent movie. And the more you can design something like this into a film, it'll just make the experience better because you don't have to, as an audience, be explained what it is. You kind of automatically know it. Is familiar but not familiar. This is one of my favorites from him. And this is where he loves to take something that you're familiar with and put it into a new context. Like for instance, using sailboats in the desert or Talos barge. You know, right away you know what it is. It's a transport vehicle, carries people, it's propelled by wind, but he puts it over the desert, which doesn't make any sense, which makes it very exotic. And here it is, you know, doing this. I mean, this is something that I would never have anticipated if I just saw episode 4, to do something as bold as this. But when he does, it creates something new and fresh. And that's one of the key takeaways that I always try to remind myself, and especially as the new designers as we work on these new films, is that there's a very strong foundation of what Star Wars is, but there's also a component of what's new. And you have to add what's new, because otherwise you're then repeating and copying what's already existing, and that doesn't work. And this is a great example of how far you can push that. Or likewise, using submarines to inspire the rebel cruisers. And for me, using the drag sled, the Plains Indian, to create a drag sled version for Anakin to transport his pod racer. And when you do this, it's a striking image, but you kind of know what it is, and it's real, it makes sense because cultures have done it. And so that's where you have to layer your designs with a lot of this as much as possible. Iconic Star Wars shapes. So this is the 4th one. There are certain shapes that are very iconically Star Wars, and a lot of it is because of George's personal taste or whatever. And the 3 that are always consistent are domes, cones, and circles. Domes in sort of certain cultures kind of exemplify their technological ability to create dome structures. For George, just created something else very exotic. These are actual German architecture in Tunisia that inspired Luke's homestead. And Ralph, of course, did his version of that, which is amazing for Talos Palace. Then I did my version for the pod race arena, where I thought, okay, if a few domes are good, let's add a lot. And I kind of went a little overboard. So I didn't quite learn the restraint lesson yet, but I put domes on everything. But it still works. And this is great. This is where iconic shapes are so important. And this is where I think art direction for Star Wars in general is brilliant. We all know that pill shapes are, you know, Empire. They sort of imply that. But what George was also doing was he was doing it with stormtroopers on black sets. And so when you see repeating white dots on a black form, you automatically feel and know that it's Empire. And when you do that, for me, this is an example of emotive art direction at its best. It really just makes everything so clear. And there's going to be a 4th principle, which is that, you know, anything that floats is Star Wars. It just gives it a little layer of magic. So out of those, I'll go through these. These are kind of those 4 principles. After, I don't know, 2 or 3 years of working, I came up with these sort of 5 rules. My grounding rules for design. And they apply not only to Star Wars film, but I believe to all design in general. They're really important. And what they are is, the first one is the silhouette. We always design for the silhouette. And this was really important because when I first started, I loved details and I got hung up on the details. And at the end, the details don't matter. It's really about the overall form. Think of the designs as logos, as symbols, as graphic as you possibly can. 3-second rule. This is my favorite. This was a really great lesson. This completely transformed how I approach design in general. And how this came about was this is out of George's cinematic experience. And how it happened was one day or one week when I was presenting all the designs that I had, I wanted to sell him on this one design that I really liked, and I thought he would like as well. And so the 2,000 images or so that he had to review that week, he just walked for the whole thing and actually stamped another drawing. And I finally had the courage to say, well, why did you stamp that one and not this one? And I started to explain what was compelling about this new one. He said, no, you're never going to have this opportunity to explain to the audience. If the design doesn't live by itself, when the audience sees it on the screen, understand what it's supposed to do, the personality that it has, whether it's bad, evil, where the pilot sits, which direction it goes, it's not going to work. The designs have to sell it right when the audience sees it. So this is where the 3 seconds is so important, is that if the audience doesn't understand it in that time frame, move on. It's probably not a very good design. Personality. This is a big one for George. He always believed that everything should have a personality. Not just characters or creatures, but sets, environments, spaceships. Everything had to be the viewer's experience because they won't believe it. It'll seem too fantastic. And the last one is the toy factor. This is where, as designers, I like to always try to give it that little extra flair. Once I hit all those previous 4 points, it's the design so that it looks really cool, so I can have that cool toy at the end. And so these are little tricks. So what I do now is, when I come up with design, and this is something that I tell a lot of new guys, and it's something you probably have heard, is try to redraw it, again, in a couple seconds. If you can't do that, then the design is probably too hard. If you look at all the original designs that Joe and Ralph did, they're very simple graphics. They're triangles. And they're all easy to read. I mean, it's the classic example of, a child could draw this and you could understand it. But if a child can't draw your drawing, then it's not a good design. So you should probably simplify it. And you can even see here, George, in his early days in his notebook, he was already thinking very graphically of how to differentiate these forms. And it's really important because it's an important lesson to learn, because a lot of people are now saying the same thing, which is like, okay, Star Wars is about simplicity, it's about logos and stuff. We can all say it sounds like a soundbite, but it's very different from doing versus saying. I mean, we can do very simple and bad, or very simple and good. It's really hard. And that's why, that's why I still have a job. And so I'm going to go through quickly some personal lessons of hits and misses. This is my first drawing ever for George, back in January of '95, and it's a complete failure. And I'm not afraid to show you because I learned to embrace failure through the whole process. And the brief was, he wanted a robotic version of a stormtrooper, so I took it literally. And I love automatic forms, joints, but it just kind of was a little bit too much. And what I did in the first week was actually, I quickly made a wall of shame where I put all my bad drawings up. Because I just wanted to remind myself, okay, what it takes to kind of get there. And unfortunately, Ray Harryhausen, one of my biggest items, came and visited. The first thing I showed him was my wall of shame. But during one of our first meetings, George laid out all the new designs that he had. So this is a more detailed example of the first task. He described in one of the first meetings that he wanted to have this new type of vehicle. And he described it as taking two of the biggest engines that you know, strap a cockpit to it, and that's the vehicle. And so me being sort of very practical and sort of realistic out of that time, I thought, okay, well, in order to do that, the engines should be protected in columns. They should be connected together because it's a little too squirrely if they're not, tethered. The cockpit should be, the cockpit should be kind of contained so the driver is protected. So I did a whole series of these, and they never worked for him. He just kept saying the same thing. Just take 2 engines. So he had an image in his mind that was very clear. And finally, I just took a research trip to the San Francisco airport, to the maintenance bay of the airport, and saw some real jet engines. I mean, they were fantastic. They were so great that you didn't have to do a whole lot to it except take it out to the desert. I mean, it only took me 283 drawings to learn that lesson. But it's one of those things where the key to a lot of designs is simplicity. I mean, don't overthink it. And what's great about that trip was that I started to learn about set dressing for real life by looking at all these things in terms of how people actually use this. And I use that to inform the design for Anakin's garage, and ultimately for our half-scale miniature, to make it feel more real. And then this is where I love George in terms of how far he'll push an envelope and how clear he can be, thinking outside the box. This was an early trader here. I think it was a missile mount for an aircraft, and I really liked it at that time. And George came back and said, well, he needs a new landing ship. And I thought, wow, well, that's kind of cool. Let me turn that into a landing ship. So I do that. And he said, okay, well, that's good. I could go in another movie, but it's not Star Wars. And I said, well, why? I mean, I think it's based on history. And he says, well, there's no personality. It just didn't work for him. So I said, okay. Well, at that time, I love animals. So I thought, well, how about if I use the dragonfly as an inspiration? And I do that. And that worked. But the amazing thing was George saw that. It's the same silhouette, but not the same form. And what it was, this grounded him in a reality that he related to. So the final version feels like a biplane, but it's a completely different form. And I love it when you can have that layering of design because you know right away it's an aircraft. It relates to something in history that we can understand, but it adds something new as well. Likewise, I use pterosaurs to inspire me for the vulture droid, or the starfighter droid. or taking the SR-71 as the inspiration for the Queen ship. Or using a jet ski as the configuration for the droid staff ship. But this was actually more heavily influenced for me on the Hummingbird. And what I did was I took that jet ski configuration, this is the head, these are the wings, the guys standing on the wings. And it's very subtle because when we were developing the Navy jungle, I wanted to go for a very primordial feel, almost like vehicles like dinosaurs. And so for me, this would be like a giant hummingbird flying through the jungles. Or using the 1963 Birdcage Maserati as the influence or inspiration for Anakin's cockpit. And you can even see we kept the fenders so that they actually protected Anakin from the straps. We even used the same blue and white coloration. And of course, using a dragster with a pallet in the back and a painted nose as the inspiration for the X-Wing. This is an early Colin Campbell model where you can see it still had the painted nose, but the whole configuration was based on that inspiration. And this is probably one of my favorites. These are lamps in California and Marin County, and they were just really cool shapes. And they were the inspiration for Slave One. And the great thing about this is, it's not about copying your inspiration. It's about how you interpret and translate and improve upon it. And it may seem really easy and obvious in hindsight. Most designs are that way. But the tricky bit is knowing and identifying. It is like, the best way to say it is, in your choices lies your talent. And so how you interpret your inspiration, two people may see the same thing but not see it or interpret it the same way. And this is where all the lessons that I've learned from George and how George operates is very key to this. So next, I'm going to get a little geeky and talk about the market process in terms of sort of my personal process in terms of designing. Show you step by step for how it works, and talk about the early days of designing for George. And so early on, when I came on, like I said, I was just right on the verge of doing digital artwork. But when I signed on, I really wanted to go old school. I wanted to go back to the roots of Rockport. So I did, all my designs were all marker sketches like this. And because the design task was so large, I had to break it up into manageable pieces. And I basically set a goal that every day I was going to have 5 of these drawings, or else I wasn't going to go home. And by the end of the week, I would have 25 to show. And that didn't always work. Sometimes I would have 2. Other days I would have 6 or 7. But it was a really good way to structure the work. And I love sort of putting boundary boxes on myself because I feel that the constraints really, allow me to do my best work. And so, but what that also did was that it forced me to keep moving at a pace so that I didn't overthink stuff. And it's a wonderful way of working through sort of your mental blocks. And the curious thing is that 25 pieces per person per week is something that has remained constant in all the art departments that I've ran and all the parts I've seen. And what it does too is here you can see, it kind of forces you to just put your ideas down on paper, no matter how crazy they are. These are crazy ideas. George didn't ask for them, but he liked them, and they didn't fit in the movie. But it's great to go that far. And so I have 2 processes that I use. So the first one is just using a blue line pencil, just to sketch it out. And so I still use this a lot. I do it sometimes on paper or sometimes on a Post-it note, just to confine it really small. It's a great process to design. But my other favorite is using this, gray markers on Xerox paper. And I love drawing on Xerox paper because it's not made for markers. It'll bleed like mad, it'll soak it up. But what I love about it is that gives you the happy accents. And so when I draw now, I use the 30% gray, cool gray marker. And I just start sketching forms. And basically what you're doing is you're letting the marker take a life of its own. You're letting it bleed. And it starts to create interesting shapes that maybe I wouldn't have anticipated. So once I get to a point where if I squint my eyes, the shapes are good, the silhouettes are there, but the details aren't there, I stop. And I go and start laying in my sort of foundation lines just to kind of make sure the next step in terms of details, all the perspective is right. And by this point, I probably would have spent 15, 20 minutes at most. Yeah, and here, could be a really fun stage or it could be a real painful one. I start to look at the globs and start to find details. basically take a fine tip pen and start to ink it. And I move around the drawing. So sometimes I'll define this, but then if I get stuck and I don't know what to do here, I move over to this side. And what you do is you're moving around the drawing, laying the drawing sort of organically form. And this is where all your training, all your research comes into play. Because in my mind, I know what kind of hinges, what kind of shapes I like. So when I see this, I can relate to that and I just draw that. So there's more of that. So just keep working on the drawing. This is the finished line drawing. So I get to the point that, it's really important in something like this that you don't have to draw everything. It's not necessary. Once you define the leg, that's enough, move on. And the reason I love this technique is because it's very efficient, it's very fast, and you're doing one generation of drawings. But then from here, I use a 30 or 50 and a 70% grade to start blocking the form. Because it gets really messy. So I start using it to kind of clean it up a little bit. Working from the back to the front, big shapes for little shapes. Here's the finished marker and line drawing. And then as a finishing touch, I'll go in just with white wash paint, just to put on some highlights, just to clean up the form. And when I started painting, because I didn't paint very well and I had really horrible habits, I had a great opportunity to go in the archives and look at Ralph's original studies. And I realized that he did small studies before he committed to the big paintings. And it was really great to see him do that because that kind of made it much easier for me to approach these paintings. And these color sketches that he did were pretty small. They were like 3 inches by 9 inches. But what I love is that he was working out the composition, the lighting, the palette, before he commits to that. So I did my versions. Mine were much smaller. I mean, I didn't have the confidence of Ralph, so these were like 1 inch by 2 inches. But I really loved doing these after a while because they were really quick. They took about an hour. They were expendable, so if I screwed up, I could just throw it in the trash. But it was great because you're almost doing the full painting as a little microscopic version of it before you commit to this. Or it just takes, a lot of days to do. Or, this is another one. This is of Coruscant. And you finish painting. By the way, those thumbnails have never been published anywhere because I kind of hide them. Because a lot of people don't appreciate it, but I thought you guys might. So my overall painting process, when I paint traditionally, they still take me a long time. And McQuarrie was doing his production paintings in like a day and a half or 2 days. Mine were taking 3 to 4 days. So the only way I could keep up with him in my mind was to really transition to digital painting. And digital painting is great. I mean, in the early days it was really hard because the tools weren't quite there. And the way I like to equate it is, it's almost like when you look at the history of painting, it's the difference between fresco painting to oil painting. Is how I consider, the paintings that we're doing now to digital painting. Because digital painting is so much more forgiving. And so what I mean is that this is a sort of a series of slides that show you sort of my painting process. And what I discovered was I was able to blend my design process with my painting process in one with digital. And it actually made things a lot more efficient for me. And the reason I keep saying efficiency and time is it is so important when we work on these films to be as efficient as possible. It's not about trying to prove yourself and trying to hit a certain sort of quantity mark, but it's all about getting the best ideas as quickly as possible because our schedules are so tight. And so time is really important. And so here, in digital painting, I can block out something, and I'll think the same way. So I'll do my sort of paint version of the marker, where I just paint out a separate layer, just to work out some shapes. And again, at this point, I don't really have an idea of what I'm doing. I'm going for something interesting. And then I start to add more details within. So this is my version of the ink drawing. And you'll see that it'll evolve. Now, I'll play around with this. That doesn't quite look right. I try that. And then finally, I can change the overall shape to try to create something that's even more dramatic. And it's something that's, of course, this would have been really hard to do traditionally because you would have to retain and cut out and start over. But with digital painting, it's very easy. And what I love about it now is that this cut my time in half. I mean, these paintings take about, half a day to a day to do. And what's even better for me is that I started to become bolder with colors. I could really take more risks because that undo button is so great. And the funny thing is that when I started to do that, I started to become a better painter doing the acrylic paintings that I did way back. And right now, most art departments, if not all of them, are all digital. And so when I did all that homework, there was a gap between the two Star Wars experiences that I had. There was about 10 years where I started doing production design as a career for Robert Zemeckis. In 2013, when The Force Awakens was announced, I thought, okay, well, I really want to come back and just be an artist again. You know, I really want to just draw, because as a production designer, you're rarely given the opportunity to do drawings. You're always supervising. And so there was a little bit of that frustrated artist in me, so I thought, okay, this was my chance. And it was absolutely terrifying, because what I realized, it's very different from doing personal proto pieces to doing pieces for real again. It's so hard. And it's so hard because the pace had changed, and because the workflow had changed so much. Art departments are now working 2D, 3D at the same time. And on The Force Awakens, we set this crazy pace where we wanted to do production paintings and designs like this, 3 or 4 or 5 of them a day. And it was something that was, blowing my mind, because I could do it in a line sketch, but to do a full-on painting as well as do the design was insane. And the only way we could do that was to use 3D. And what I didn't realize fully until I joined the team was that everybody was doing 3D, and they were so fast, they had 10 years of experience on it. And so it was awful. For me, it was like back in 1989 when I joined ILM. I just learned I had to learn all over again. And instead of a year, I had a month. And so I did the same thing. I basically gave myself a month as homework. I forced myself to learn 3D. And it allowed me to learn it just enough to do the foundation so I can do a drawing or painting like this. And what's great about 3D is that the way I use it anyway is that you can then render something, mix and match it to create new design. So I still do all the heavy lifting of design still in 2D in paint. And on my best days, about 5 months later, I could do maybe 3 or 5 of these a day. And it's really funny because I was by far the slowest of the team. Some of the guys are doing 10. It just blows my mind, how they can do it, because they were so good with that. And it's, but for me, it really wasn't, about the quantity. It was just like, I was just so happy. I'm now 54, so I was just happy that I could learn something new. 54. What's also great is that once you can do that, you can start figuring out shop design as well. Because I always wanted to figure out, okay, well, how does a TIE fighter land? So this made sense to me. Or, should the TIE fighter have headlights? Or doing this, this would have taken traditionally over a week for me to paint, but now it's like 3 hours. And eventually I got good enough where I could start to model and design at the same time. So this is still a very ugly model, but at least it gave me a good foundation to do a painting. So then my percentage of modeling and design versus finishing paint is now evened out to be about 50-50. Some of the guys will do a finished design and rendering almost to 85-95%, and they're just a small percentage of touch-ups. Here's a good example of one of the sets. So this is a very simple model, but put together in a very complex way to create one of the hallways when we first meet Ray. Likewise, I always loved the AT-AT, and so this was my exploration of how we get an AT-AT into the film. That's the first painting. And this was for early exploration where we were trying to explore, well, how do we reveal Ray in the movie? Another one where we follow her journey as she's going through the Rex Star Destroyer. We start to see familiar shapes. So, and as you can see, so much of this, the foundation of it is all 3D geometry. And there's a bit of an issue that I'm kind of experiencing personally, is that when you start to use 3D, it can be very seductive. You can come up with a really compelling image that looks so great, but it kind of blocks you in. And so part of the thing that I started to realize is that my paintings and designs start to get really stiff, because you start to get lazy. And so what happened on The Force Awakens was that about 3 months into it, we all took a trip up to the archives, and we sort of dug into the files for the new guys to see about the Force drawings. And we loved them so much that we decided, okay, for 1 week we're going to turn off our computers. Everybody was going to go Ozu. And it was such a leveling week for me. I mean, it was such a pleasure to see these young guys struggle. So this is one of the drawings that I did that week. And where I am now, I use a blended technique. where I use 3D a little bit, but I love sort of the freedom of digital paint. So for me, the pendulum for 3D has kind of swung, it's kind of found its balance. But a lot of it too is based on the director. Gareth loves sort of very sort of free-form designs. JJ loved more finished designs. And so really it's nice to have in your tool set all these different techniques that you can implement. But for me personally, I love doing stuff like this now because these are really fun exploration paintings. They take about a couple hours to do. By the way, all these are non-Star Wars images. This is my current homework. But it's just a fun way to keep learning and growing. To do just like this. And so for me, my ongoing design process, my homework is a continuing journey. And it just feels so great to be back in the Star Wars universe. So there you have it. Those are kind of the lessons that I learned in about 25 years. The art part of that, if we just sign our names from McQuarrie, we get it approved. So it's, but we tried to because he was so great. I mean, he got Star Wars. His style is so much like Star Wars, and so as long as you just pick the right ones, and we did. We actually leveraged quite a bit. You'll see in the new films as well. We relied a lot on Ralph.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
I'm a sort of illustrator and graphic designer, and I'm a huge fan of all of your work, all of Feng Zhu's work. Really, my question is it possible now in the movie environment where it's such a high-risk environment? Will they trust someone who's sort of self-taught? I know you said you set yourself to 52 weeks to get yourself out of that portfolio for that first year. Is it possible to self-teach yourself into this industry anymore? Or?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the astonishing thing is that the level of talent today is so high. I mean, we're finding new artists all the time just through internet searches of people, and that's where, in some ways, everything is dependent on your portfolio. It's your artwork that will define whether or not you get the job. And the way I cast art departments is to look for very specific people who are very good at individual things. Not so much a jack of all trades, because collectively, as an art department, we are that. But I look for somebody who has a very special point of view and a technique that will apply to, let's say, the films that we're doing. And so there's a lot of opportunities. In fact, in every film, we always go out. Believe it or not, the group of artists who are working in the film industry is very small, but there's a huge pool that we're always tapping into. And like for Rogue One, we used a lot of sort of new artists as well who came in from games or came in from other industries. So yeah, I'll say just put together an awesome portfolio.
Great, that's really reassuring. Thanks.
Hey Doug, big fan. That guy actually asked the question I was going to ask. So. Quick one then. I am pretty good with Photoshop, but would you recommend, do you work with cross-platform software? Would you recommend that to create your images?
Yeah, no, as far as platform and software, no. I use Photoshop and I basically use like 4 brushes, so very basic for me. And primarily it's because I don't know all the layers of Photoshop. I know it's super powerful. A lot of the guys that I work with know everything, all the layer tricks, all the tricks of how to blend things, different filters and things. And for me, I like to just keep it very simple because it's something that I can use. And if you're not using it every day, I'll tend to forget. So I like to keep my palette simple. Basically, it's just Photoshop for painting. I use the markers for drawing. I use Moto for 3D. And there's all levels of skill set, because a lot of the guys that I work with use the same tools. Some use Painter, some use ZBrush, and some use Moto that are just like, blows my mind because they can model texture, render it so that it's like a finished painting. I'll never be able to do that, so, which is okay.
Thanks Doug, you're a legend.
Oh, thank you.
Hello. I was wondering if you put a lot of hard work into a design and it gets rejected by the director right away. Is there a specific way you deal with that?
Yeah, that would cry. No, it happens all all the time. And that's the thing is, you have to keep reminding yourself, this is a job. We're doing it for a very specific reason. We're trying to sort of envision a film from the director's point of view. And so I rarely take it personally. I just know that, okay, it didn't quite work. It doesn't mean that it's not a great design, that it's not a great painting. It just didn't fit, what the director wanted.
Hello, I'm a 3D artist, so I was wondering, when you use 3D models in your paintings, do they end up as a base for a finished product in the end? For example, when you model a vehicle and it ends up in a movie, do they take your 3D model and use it to remodel it?
Yeah. Yes and no. My models are really ugly. They're just like, they're horrible. And a lot of times when I do get, let's say, a spaceship model that's approved, I do have a foundation. And that's really helpful that I pass it to one of the concept modelers in the art department who can then take it and basically use it as a guideline that they rebuild the whole thing. And so rarely are any of our art department models, do they ever flow downstream into sort of the finished product, just because of our workflow. And we're trying to do it really quick, so they're just horrible in terms of modeling. But they're good for form.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hello. They say a good artist borrows, a great artist steals. I think on that we all agree that you're a great artist. If you're happy to confess, what aspects of your art are you happiest that you stole?
Yeah, a lot of it I would have to say is rough. I studied his work so much when I was growing up, and his and Joe Johnston's in terms of form. And it's always about not so much copying what he did, but then what I learned was to copy or be inspired by his influences. And that was the big lesson that I learned from George, is that, there is a tendency to kind of like, if you see a great idea, use it, but you have to do your interpretation of it. Don't do it direct, because ultimately a lot of times it won't work. And plus, there's a little sense of, or a big sense of ownership. For me, I like to be inspired by everything, because I try to see everything, but then I like to be my version of that. And there's no shame in doing that, because it's ultimately being filtered through you.
Very much.
Sure.
This will be the last question, so no pressure. Hi, I would like to know if you were born with this passion for art, or if you developed this passion after seeing the Star Wars movie, or basically if you were born and you wanted to draw, you wanted to design.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I kind of see them both as the same, because when I drew as a kid, it was always with mind that I was creating a world that I want to experience in real life. And I think the beauty of, how lucky I am to do this for a living is that I'm doing that and I get to experience it in the cinema. But my first passion is really just, painting. Because someday when I retire, I just want to do paintings for myself of worlds that I want to be in. That's the way I always look at it is, what do I want to see? Where do I want to be? And ultimately, if that gets translated up on the big screen, that's even better. And fortunately for Star Wars, a lot of those great ideas do end up on the screen because Star Wars is such an expansive universe. So.
Thank you all so much for coming. Let's please give it up again for Doug Chiang.